Start the recording. There we go. Thank you. So hello, everyone. Welcome to Parenting Strategies, and thanks for being with us tonight. I'm Betsy Brainerd, the Supervisor of Early Literacy at the Arapahoe Libraries, and with me today are two early literacy librarians on the Child and Family Library Services team, Andy Gallegos and Lauren Reed. We will be recording this program so that you can refer back to it on our YouTube channel in a few days. The goal of the Parenting Strategies program is to provide support to parents and caregivers for early childhood issues, things like nutrition, behavior, and speech. Tonight, we're happy to welcome back Jen Kniffin-Turner to offer advice about child development and behavior. We specifically mentioned transitions in the program description, but I know Jen can handle a wide range of behavior questions and development questions. She has some prepared remarks, and then we'll open up for audience questions after that. Lauren Reed and I will monitor your questions through either the Q&A function or the chat function. Either one is fine. Jen has been in private practice as a consultant and therapist for almost 7 years. She's certified in EMDR and endorsed as an early childhood mental health expert by the Colorado Association of Infant Mental Health. Her credentials allow her to offer continuing education credits for training in the areas of social and emotional development. And she supports parents and families in trauma processing, developmental concerns, sensory behaviors, and discipline woes. And very importantly, Jen makes frequent appearances at our Family Place Play and Learn workshops. In fact, she will be with us at the COBOL workshop in a few weeks. So Jennifer, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, those workshops are always great. Thank you for having me. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited. What I'm going to do is cover some really, in broad strokes, cover some developmental domains and ideas about development. And then I want to make sure that there's a lot of time to answer any questions that you have, to speak about any specific behaviors that you're struggling with, and how that pertains to development or what that looks like at different stages. Sometimes the problems that we're having are almost a product of the developmental stage and could transition, but it's always interesting to kind of explore that. So right before we started, I believe Betsy had sent out an email that had just some informational sheets regarding some of the stuff that we're going to talk about. So it's a little bit more in depth than what I'm going to do in these first few minutes. So I'm going to jump in. And if you have questions, please feel free to ask, or if you want to wait, that's fine also. So when we think about development, we think about it in a few specific domains, and their basic domains are cognitive development, which is brain development, communication, which is both receptive and expressive language. So receptive is what they can take in versus expressive is what they can actually create or articulate. And that takes forms in many different ways, depending on the developmental stage. Social and emotional development, adaptive function. So how they're able to shift from one thing to the next, how they're able to transition through different activities through development. And physical development would include fine motor and gross motor and general growth. So there's a couple of different themes that we talk about. You guys have probably all taken your kiddos to the pediatrician, and they have that ASQ is often one of the assessments that they hand you, and it's typically age specific and asks you some really basic general developmental questions about where your child is. And that's because there are particular markers that we're looking for at different stages of development that help us understand what's going on with your kiddo or any kiddo. So the sheets that you have, the sheets that you were given break down. I'm going to pull them up just so that you know what I'm talking about. Hold on just a second. See if I can do this. There we go. So these sheets go through each of these developmental stages, 0 to 3, 3 to 6, and 6 to 9. And then each page has the different age groups on the top. And it talks a little bit about each of these domains: cognitive, communication, social, emotional, adaptive, and physical development. So these are just, again, categories and ways to understand, is my kiddo doing what they're supposed to? Is it normal that they're doing it at this thing? And again, these are really broad categories. So if your kiddo is not necessarily walking by a specific time, is that important? It depends on what else they're putting their energy into. They might be learning other things. They might have put a different skill ahead of that. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But these sheets that are in that email that went out go all the way up to 60 to 72 months. So really understanding those early years, 0 to 5, when there's so much growth and development happening. So there's that. Another thing that you guys might hear people speak about when they are talking about development is executive function. And executive function is like a cluster of mental processes that allow people to function more successfully in the adult world that we have created for ourselves now. So some of these skills are attentional control, being able to focus your attention in one place or another and then to shift. Cognitive inhibition, inhibitory controls. So that's impulse control. Working memory, being able to hold something in your memory so that you can work on it. And then cognitive flexibility, so that ability to shift when you need to shift. A lot of executive function is actually learned through our social emotional development, through our engagement with other people, and also through play. Play is super, super important developmentally, although sometimes it seems sort of just like a way to, we want the kids to play, and sometimes it feels like it's not necessarily important. It's actually really important. In the same way that 2 tiger cubs are going to roll around and wrestle and fight, they're learning how to hunt. Kiddos through play learn how to have relationships, learn how to shift if they're playing multiple roles. And they will often, like, especially when they get a little older, 3, 4, 5, they start like, no, okay, now you do this and I'll be this. And they keep changing the rules. And that helps them so much in their ability to develop, to be able to develop their ability to play a number of different roles. So I can be a mother, I can be a provider, I can be a teacher, I can be all of these different roles that I have. Those are part of executive function, and it's really important how we learn that in play. And lots of parents know this, lots of providers know this, that if you ask a kid to just stand still, they will stand still for maybe 30 seconds. But if you ask them to be a tree, they can stand there for a couple minutes because they have a job, because they have a role, and they're playing the role. And if they get uncomfortable, they might change the rules, or let's say trees walk, or a number of different things, but that is part of what we want them to do when they're playing. And the other part of that is, again, the cooperation of it is agreement of rules within the group that they're playing with. And that's going to teach them how to have relationships as well. So that's super fun, and I could talk about that for a long time. You guys have probably also heard the term attachment. And attachment is the idea that we have a secure base. We have one central place that we are grounded and rooted to a caregiver that we trust, in which we know our needs are going to be met. And once that is established, we are much safer and much more willing to go out into the world and explore. So if you ever had a cat and they go outside, they go like a foot, and then they come back, right? And you've seen kiddos do this too. They go a little bit of ways, and then they check back to see where you're at. And they go a little bit further, and then they come back, and they touch you, and they play with you, and they see you, and they make sure that you see them, and then they keep going. That is them checking their secure base. And that is a fantastic skill to have, because they have that trust. They can explore more safely in the world. When they don't have that secure base, we see more anxiety. We see behaviors that they struggle to connect, or they're anxious in their connections, or they're unwilling to connect because it doesn't feel safe. Or they will reach out to anybody for connection because they're not quite sure where it's going to come from. So those are all attachment styles, and we can talk about that more if you would like to. There is a body of research on that, and if you wanted to look into that more yourself, you could Google or plug in secure base into YouTube. And there's a couple of names that will come up and you can explore some of those videos and some of that information. A couple things that I want to touch on really quickly. One is the physical development and the development of self-soothing behaviors. A lot of times self-soothing behaviors catch parents' eye because they look like they could be, they might be touching their private area. They might be exploring their body or trying to touch your breast or different areas. And in some ways, that can be a little bit off-putting for parents because they're concerned that it might be a sexualized behavior. It's not. It's a self-soothing behavior. So in the same way that they learn to rock, that they learn to self-soothe by sucking their thumb, they're very physical in their bodies. They have a very physical relationship with their world right now, and they don't have language. So they are more prone and more likely to look for those behaviors that create self-soothing in the physical body. And sometimes that does mean touching their genitals because it's self-soothing, not because it's going to reach any sort of sexual peak, but because it feels good and it's self-soothing. I remember working with a mom and she was really worried because the child kept reaching into her shirt and would rub on her while she was breastfeeding. And she was concerned about that. That would be a perfect time to find a behavior that was self-soothing. As you're nursing, you feel safe, you feel attached, you feel secure. And part of what you do then is rub because it helps you feel calm. So that's something that sometimes parents bring up and we're happy to talk about more as well. When we talk about development, sometimes the behaviors that we're concerned with are very much developmental. And sometimes they're sort of a product of transitioning from one developmental stage to another. So if you're interested, there's someone called Dr. Brazelton, and he has written a whole bunch of stuff called touch points. And touch points is the idea that we can only juggle so many things in our brain at once. It's like if you picture your computer and you have too many screens open, one of them might drop. So let's say that I've got one thing down. Vicky likes him. Hi, Vicky. Let's say that I've got crawling down. I've got walking. Let's say that like I'm sleeping through the night. I'm eating pretty good. And then all of a sudden I figure out how to stand up. Now I'm standing up in my crib all the time and it's driving people crazy. And now I'm not sleeping well. And I get a little distracted and I'm not eating as well. That's because we can't juggle all of them. So it takes so much cognitive power to be able to juggle these balls that I did have going. Okay, I'm sleeping through the night. Okay, I got that. Okay, I'm eating this. Okay, I got that. And then somebody throws in, oh, standing up. Oh my gosh. And so sometimes we actually can get distracted or not as much energy goes to those skills that we already had while we learn to pick up this other one. And then pretty soon we juggle them all. Okay, now I've got all of these. Okay, and now, oh, walking, whoops. And we drop another one because it's just too much. And so we start to incorporate that and you'll see a little bit of a shift and we're like, what's wrong? He used to be sleeping through the night just fine. He used to be able to do all these things and now it's just gone. And part of that is because the development happens so quickly that the brain just needs to adapt, bring in the new skill, find a level of mastery, and then it can incorporate it into the function of the child, and then they will move on. So any of these I'm willing to talk about more. I also think that there was some interest in talking about biting and hitting and lots of other stuff that parents might have questions about. So I want to open it up before I keep talking and just kind of check in to see if there are particular behaviors or concerns that anyone has that they want to bring to the discussion.
And I'm going to just launch this quick one question poll right now before we get into the discussion section. Here we go. Just one question. How did you hear about this program? This will be very helpful to us if you could answer this. Thank you. Oh, it's all different. One more person. Okay, well, very good. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Oops.
Oops.
I want to stop sharing. There we go. Thank you. Oh, stop sharing. Oh no. Hold on. Is it gone? Jen?
I still have it on mine, but I think I can just close it. There we go.
I can't see it.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry
Moving
for
on.
the interruption.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah. So anybody have any particular questions or thoughts or topics that they want to explore this evening?
Yes, just drop it into the chat or the Q&A. Asking for a parent fits at bedtime.
Yeah, great question. So I would be curious about the age of this person who's having fit, not the parent, the person that's having the fits at bedtime. 19 months. Okay. So that makes a lot of developmental sense, right? Because they've really started to understand object permanence, the idea that when something is out of sight, it still exists and that they are separate from the parent. And so that when someone goes away, there is that sense that there is no one here. They don't have language for it. So all of those are starting to come together. And you might really see some of that around this age. There are a couple different things that we can do to attend to this. I would be curious about what the routine is around bedtime, what time bedtime starts, because sometimes if we're starting, you know how when kiddos get and it's been a little bit late and they're like, oh, they have their second wind. That's actually cortisol. That's actually cortisol saying, oh, okay, we need to be awake. Fine, we'll be awake. And the hormone the body pumps itself through with cortisol, which is filled with, pumps itself full of cortisol, which is the stress hormone. So it's actually not a second wind, it's a stress response. What happens when we get into that cycle is once we are releasing cortisol, it's harder to go to sleep. It takes longer for us to go to sleep. And we don't sleep as hard or as well. And then we kind of get ourselves stuck in a pattern. So any of you parents that know if we've had a few days where we really got dysregulated on our sleep and it feels like it takes our kiddo a while to recover, that's kind of what's going on. Yeah, they're really tired. And part of that is that cortisol. So I'd be curious about the routine for this kiddo, if they're getting naps, how often they're getting naps, how much they're sleeping, if they have restful sleep or not. All of those things might help us understand those pieces. As far as the actual practice of putting a kiddo at this age to sleep, I would get a really, really almost rigid routine where we do it pretty much the same way every single time, that there are specific cues that tell this little person and their body that it's time to go to sleep. If we have screens on, let's turn them off at least an hour before. We can even dim the lights because it tells the body that it's time to calm down. And the lights inside our homes don't allow us to do that. But the way that the sun sets and the way that all of those things come together naturally tell our body that it's time to go to sleep. So if we can shut the shades and start to bring that process in even a little bit earlier, that might help. If we can get a routine that is very clear about what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, we have a couple of things that we always do the same way, and then it's time to go to sleep. So again, I would kind of be curious about what is the routine? If it's a big fight, what's going on for this kiddo? If they're putting the kid back in bed 16, 17 times, if they're shutting the door and walking away, if they're so frustrated that they're exhausted and they're giving in, because we all know as parents at some point, you're like, I'll give you a car if you would just go to sleep. And so some of that, we want to look at the relational dynamic around what's happening and start to understand how we can best, parents are separating and share time. So that might be it too, is that there might be a difference in how each parent does it. So hopefully those parents are able to communicate about what bedtime looks like at both houses, because this might be a period of time for this kiddo where it's best to do it pretty as close to the same as possible across both homes, so that they can get and build that trust in how it's done. Having those parents talk about bedtime, what time things start, and all of those sorts of things can be really, really helpful. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's another question about bedtime for a 3-year-old. Would you
Okay.
make a different recommendation for that age?
So they're a little bit different. Let me see. 3-year-olds have already conceptualized, right, of this separation, but that doesn't mean that they're over it. Depends on what's going on for their day. If they're more anxious, they're more likely to be a little bit more clingy. I would, for any kiddo that is struggling with bedtime, I would suggest that we get almost rigid in our expectations and our routine. That doesn't mean I don't want you to be without compassion. I don't want you to be like, no, that's it, lights out, and shut the door, and that's because that's how it works. But I do want there to be some boundaries around it. So here's another piece, especially for a 3-year-old, if these behaviors are, because a 19-month-old might still be in a crib, not able to get out of the bed, but I'm guessing that a 3-year-old can get up as many times as they want. So it might be that we even need to move the entire process up forward in time, because we start at 7, we hope they're asleep by 8, and at 9:30 we're still doing this. So it might be, and so then we do get into the cortisol and a whole bunch of other stuff, and they're not getting good rest. So it might be that we need to move this entire process up until 6:30, so that we still are actually planning and scheduling for the difficult period before they get to sleep, and hopefully still getting to sleep by 8 o'clock, for example. Other things for 3-year-olds is they can engage a little bit more in some of the activities around bedtime, perhaps reading. Perhaps we always sing a same song together. Perhaps there are ways that we have a connection, or that we do certain things, that mom sits with me for 10 minutes, or that dad does this. Different things that we can do to give them the sense of safety in going to sleep. Sleep is kind of weird. I mean, if you think about it, it's just this, like, we're just supposed to just like disappear into darkness, and and everything stops. And it's kind of hard to start to conceptualize that. As adults, we're really used to it, and it seems pretty simple. But the concept of sleeping is everyone's going to leave me alone in the dark, and I'm just going to like go away for a little while, can be a little bit scary. If you have a kiddo that is pretty articulate, we could start talking about some of these things. What is it that scares you? Do they need a night light? Not a lot of light, but a little night light. Can we put a light in the bathroom? Is that what's bothering them? Are we making sure that we're stopping drinking at a certain time before bed so that they don't have to go to the bathroom? Let's remove all of those variables that create opportunities to get out of bed. For the 10th time, I have to pee. Okay, well, we're going to stop drinking drinks at 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock so that we don't have to pee all night long. Stuff like that can really be helpful. So I'm not sure if that helps, but if you want to
Then we did have the question about the hitting and biting.
Hitting and biting, yes. So depending on the age, biting typically happens right around the time we start to develop language, because we're doing something with our mouth. The problem with biting is that it works really, really well, because what we're trying to do is get a response, right? And if you bite someone, they're going to respond. And so it's really hard to teach that this behavior doesn't work, because it does work, because it gets a response, whether it's from peers or anybody else. It's quite effective. So a couple of things that I would ask is, one, have we evaluated this kiddo for an oral stimulation piece? Sometimes these behaviors, hitting included, biting, these sorts of behaviors are actually the kiddo seeking sensory information. So one of the things that you can do is complete a sensory assessment. I have one. If you need one, I'm happy to support you in that and give you a screening tool. You can also go to your local Child Find office, early childhood development office, and ask for a screening assessment. You can also find an OT or occupational therapist that would do this. And what we're looking at is, are they doing these behaviors because it meets a sensory need? And sensory is just that. It's the information that we take in from our senses. So sometimes that behavior is just to meet our own need, because I'm looking for more sound, I'm looking for stimulation. If I bite somebody, and first of all, I get that sensory input from my muscles and the sensation of it. I also get a bunch of noise. I also get a bunch of action that happens. There's all these different sensory stimuli that come with biting or hitting that be quite satisfying for a kiddo that's looking for a little bit of sensation. So that's one thing. If we are looking at that, we might think about getting some of those oral stimulators. There are a ton of them. There's something you can buy online called a Z-Vibe, which is this. It looks like a toothbrush, except it has a little rubber end, and it takes 2 little tiny AAA batteries, and you turn it on and it just vibrates a little bit. And so you can put it in your mouth or in the kiddo's mouth and rub it around, and it stimulates the mouth. And so they're getting that stimulation. Kiddos that struggle with eating or are very sensitive to different things, sometimes if you do that before they eat, they might be a little bit more likely to eat food. There's chew sticks, there's things they can wear around their neck, there's all sorts of stuff. If it is just basically about meeting a need or avoiding something or expressing feelings, then we have to figure out how to disengage from the behavior from a very behavior interventionist perspective. We have to figure out how to make it stop working for them. So biting, does it mean they get the toy? Does it mean that they get out of whatever it is that they don't like, that they don't want to be in? Does it mean that they get what they want? If they bite up here and they drop the toy, it worked. They got the toy. So that one is a little bit different. One of the things that I would suggest is being very, very verbal in how you are articulating for this kiddo. So I would spend some time narrating for this kid and saying, oh yeah, you were really mad and you wanted that toy. Providing the language that you believe is a narration for what's going on for them. Give them the language so that they can start to use their mouth for other things, that they can start to use their articulation and verbalizing as opposed to biting. And the more that they are heard, the more that we start to narrate and give them the understanding that we're listening and that we're going to respond, the less likely that is that they have to use that behavior. Am I saying it should go without consequence? No, but there are a lot of consequences for biting. Nobody wants to play with you. People get mad. Sometimes we do need to take a break or go sit somewhere else so that we're not right next to our other peers. But it kind of depends on what the cause is. I would want to be ruling out the sensory piece. I would want to really understand, are they behind developmentally in verbalization, expressive language, before I start to punish or provide consequences for the behavior, because I want to make sure I'm understanding what it's coming from. Same with hitting. Hitting is, again, a very physical expression, and it's a way to get your needs met. And if it's not a sensory thing, if they're not developmentally behind in language, then we can understand that it's just the behavior that they figured out is working. And again, then we got to run intervention. We got to figure out how to stop making it work for them. So if they hit somebody and then they get the toy, then the toy gets returned to the other kiddo, or they don't get to have their turn with the toy, or they have to go away and do something else, or they don't get to be, they can't sit next to that kid because they keep biting him. There's different ways that we can engage in relational consequences without getting really punitive around those behaviors. Because especially at that age, all behavior equals communication, all of it, even when it's not verbal. They don't have a lot of language. So
I think this participant said that the hitting is occurring during diaper changes or things they don't want to do.
yes, yeah, okay. So let's give them something to play with. Let's give them something in their hands. Maybe we even give them something to hit so that we can start to shape the behavior. If they're expressing a dislike, what can I hit? So you can't hit me, but you can hit this. or I have this over here, you can hit this. Or sometimes if we've already given a reaction to it, right, then they know they get a reaction. So just like anything else, it's going to get worse before it gets better, because they're like, well, how come you're not reacting now? You used to get upset, or you used to react when I did this. So you put a pillow up and you say, oh, what are you? And we start playing. I wonder if I can do this before you hit me. We can disengage from the power struggle of it in some ways. That might really help. If we disempower the behavior and make it stop working, that can be really helpful too. If it's something that he's doing during diaper changing, yeah, that makes sense. I would be really curious about a sensory evaluation too. So you might want to look into that a little bit.
Okay, thank you. I have another question here. A 26-month-old is very attached to his parents and takes a while to warm up to others. He attends daycare 3 to 4 days a week and has adjusted well with familiarity, but in new situations, he fusses and clings for longer periods and has tantrums more frequently. How can we help him with these situations/transitions? At this point, we feel guilty leaving him with anyone, even for a couple of hours, including grandparents.
Okay, so this is such a great question too. There is a couple of different things. One is, I would encourage you, a lot of times as parents, what we're like do is we start to we do it, and then we disappear, right? We like get them engaged in something, and then we sneak out the back so that we don't have to have that interaction where they get upset, and hopefully they can handle it a little bit. If that's something that you have tried, I would suggest you don't do it, because clearly there is some kind of anxiety for this kiddo around separation or around familiarity. And if there has been an experience where what he does trust or what he does feel safe with randomly disappears, that creates even more anxiety in these situations. So again, it's time to get rigid on a routine. So sometimes it's like 26-month-old. So we could say up, high, down, low, give kisses, gotta go, right? And we do it every single time. And so we do that. You might even start doing it at home. You might even start doing it when you go to the bathroom. You might even start doing it when you leave for 5 minutes, if you step outside to get the mail. There might be a way that you can start to build the trust in the return of the caregiver, so that they more and more trust it. You can also do this by even, it feels a little silly, they're a little bit old for it, but I might even sing if I go into the other room. I make sure they have visual connection with me or auditory connection with me at all times. Now, in some ways, this feels like I'm feeding into this. But again, disappearing, trying to push them off, trying to be like, oh, you're fine, isn't going to work. It actually creates more anxiety. Now, I'm not saying that you should sit there and make it a 2-hour transition either, but we want to get some routine around it. We want to talk about what it is. Perhaps there are ways you can prepare them. You can say, we're going to go to grandma's house. We'll be there until dark. And then we're going to come home. And you're going to come home with mommy. So we can talk about what specific things are going to go on so they know what to expect. What I believe, let me look at this again. Clings to longer periods and tantrums more frequently. I don't know what the history of this person is, of this kiddo, and how they have had experiences with caregivers or what that consistency looks like. I'm not saying that you haven't been consistent. I'm just saying that their perception of how much, and if there's been an ongoing thing and people get frustrated and people are more likely to just say, okay, well, we're going to go, then it's easy to build it into something that much bigger than it is. And yes, it's also very developmentally appropriate, again, which is frustrating. So there is probably a time period in which this will get better. But right now, I would find a routine. I would figure out ways that this kiddo can be supported. What do you want to take with you? What do you, my daughter is notorious for this, because now it's turned like I've never seen anyone fit an entire bedroom into a bag, but she will, and that's how she feels comfortable. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. When it works and she wants to feel comfortable and I can support her in that, I will. When there's times when we have to pare it down, then we'll have that conversation. But at this point, what we want to do is support the behaviors, support the transition, the ability to be with others in whatever ways that we can. And then we can start to kind of back off of that once they feel more comfortable.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions now.
Oh, yay.
COVID baby, he was home with me, his mom, for 10 months before going to daycare or anywhere around others. Oh, I think this was,
Oh, okay.
never mind. I
Great.
think it was
Yep.
extra information,
Yep.
assuming that may have
Yes.
contributed.
And that
Yeah.
makes sense. Also assuming that they may have contributed.
Yeah.
It might have, but it sounds like he has been going and being with other people too. I am a firm believer in the rule out method. I feel like, especially with these kiddos in this age group, I want to make sure I understand all the things that it isn't before I decide what it is. So before I decide that this kiddo is just over anxious, or any kiddo is just defiant, or whatever the sort of the assessment is, I want to make sure that I understand what's going on. So I might encourage you to go get an evaluation for sensory as well, because sometimes that can create a lot of emotional, if they are fairly overstimulated, if it's a kiddo that is more avoidant or sensitive to sensory stimuli, they don't like other kids because they're noisy and they don't know when what they're gonna do. They're unpredictable. Adults are so much safer. And so some of those environments with new sounds, new smells, new movements, new people, not my same stuff that I'm comfortable with, can really be overwhelming. And so I might encourage that sensory evaluation in the same way. Let's make sure that this isn't a piece that's going on for him, because right now at this age is the best time to look at that and support it and figure out how to empower this kiddo so that they have confidence to meet their needs and then move forward in their development.
Here's another question. Thank you. And if anybody does need information about how to get those sensory assessments, we do have early intervention and developmental pathways information available at the library.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep.
So here's another question from a storytime specialist. We request that all food or snacks be put away during story time. Some parents ask me how they can avoid giving their children food for distraction and good behavior. Any good tips that I can give them for soothing their children without food? And these kiddos are 1 to 3 years old.
So let me make sure I'm understanding this right. The concern is that you ask the food to be put away, and then parents are like, well, how am I supposed to soothe my kiddo or encourage them to stay here if they're not being essentially
I think that's it.
bribed with snacks? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. That's a great question. If that is what the kid is used to, then you're going to have a harder time, right? Because if they have been sort of trained that they do what they want and they get a snack, then that's what they're going to expect. That's going to run into a problem at story time. So what other things can we put in front of them? Do they need a little ball? Maybe they need to be able to wiggle around. 1 to 3, you don't have the attention span is minimal. And so the more physical movement we can get involved with, the more engaged they'll be. I always picture this like the game of whack-a-mole, right? If you've got a group of kiddos that young, as soon as one stands up and we're like, oh, sit down, you pretty much lost the whole group, because the rest of the time you're just like trying to get them all to stay with you. And so as soon as you see that fidget, I might say, okay, if there's some way that we can incorporate movement into the story that you're sharing, I would encourage that. If there's not, then I would say, oh, wait, I see all the ants, and we stand up and we stomp the ants, right? And we get everybody to stomp their feet and stomp the ants, or we do some way to engage physical movement so that they have some way to keep their body engaged in what's going on. Sometimes it's just a wiggle. Sometimes it's getting them to push on mom's hands or to push on the floor, something that creates that physical pressure in the joints of movement that will allow them to stay more engaged. You've got kind of a double header question here, because part of it is about the children and how we keep them engaged. And part of it is about the adults that are using food or are dependent on food to get their child to be cooperative or compliant. And that's a different question. If that's an ongoing thing, it might be worth a conversation ahead of time with parents, or just like just a brief check-in. Hey, everybody, we're not going to do food. I know this can be really hard because a lot of us use food to help our kiddos stay focused. And so make sure they have a good snack before they come. It can go out in an email. Please make sure that they're fed. If they need something, maybe they still have a pacifier. Maybe this is a great time for one of those oral fixation toys. There's tons of them around. There's different ways that we can provide that stimulation. And if you've got parents that are just refusing or don't want to do it, or are a little bit sort of lost without that tactic, as the story time person, that might be a hard place for you to be. But recognizing that that's more about what's going on between them and their kiddo and their sense of comfort and how they take care of their kiddo, than it is about what's going on in that particular setting. So sometimes that's true. If it's always food and they're bringing food into the room and there's no food now, yeah, we're going to have a little bit more of a problem. Yeah. So I'm not sure that answered your question. I'm not sure that was any help at all.
I think that was helpful. But we have another difficult question for you.
Okay, I'm ready.
This is from a grandparent who says that their 7-year-old grandchild is very intelligent, but exhibits rude behaviors, clever comments, but doesn't recognize or change their behavior. We have tried standard discipline, calm chats, negative takeaways, pick and choose battles, positive approvals. We thought he would outgrow it. This seems not normal. And his parents or her parents are at their wits' end. What kind of advice do you have?
Okay. 7 and very intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
It's a bad combo. If they're very intelligent, then they have the capacity to understand what they're doing, and not necessarily the social inclination to understand the impact of what they're doing. But again, my guess is that it serves a purpose. It gets some kind of reaction. It gets some sort of engagement, positive or negative. This little person has figured out how to navigate the world, and in this way it feels really successful. And so it's not likely that standard discipline, calm chats, negative takeaways, pick and choose, that all of these things would be really, really valiant efforts. And we said we thought we'd grow out of it. So I'm wondering how long it's been going on. But so a couple different things. One is, can we, and if there's parents and grandparents involved, so can we unite in how we're going to respond to this behavior? Because here's another thing about behaviorist theory. Positive reward, like if I get rewarded think about gambling. If I get rewarded every single time, I might actually get bored. If I never get rewarded, I'm not going to do it because it feels silly. But if you're saying there's a chance, right? If there's like, well, it worked here and it didn't work there, or it worked last time. And this is true with all behaviors. If you tend to be a parent, not that I've ever done this. If you tend to be a parent that says, okay, but one more, okay, 2 more minutes, and I have this gray area, I've essentially taught my kiddo that there is room to push it, right? Because it might be 5, it might be 10, it might be 20 minutes, it might be worth asking 4 or 5 times. This is where, as a parent, I have really, because my first reaction when a kiddo asks me something is to say no. And then I start thinking, well, why can't they? I wonder, is there something? And by the time I've come to yes, they've asked me 6 or 7 more times. I have literally trained them to ask me that many times. So when we start thinking about how to strategize and intervene on certain behaviors, I want to get everybody that is a caregiver for this kiddo on the same page. I want us to react very similarly. Of course, it will look different with every person, but I want to get as clear margins, as black and white as we can when we're responding to these behaviors. This might even be something that we talk to the school about, depending on what's going on, if it's happening at school. But the more likely, the more that reaction or response that they get permeates across all of their settings and relationships, the more likely it is that you're going to get a response to the intervention, right? And you might see this. You might say, well, he does it more here, he doesn't do it there, he doesn't do it at school. That's because this is a learned behavior. It's a relational behavior. He learns that it works in certain settings, and he's learned that it doesn't work in other settings. So that's how he uses it. Also, understand that if you decide to run an intervention on this behavior, I want you to think about the time, because if you have tried all of these different things and it continues, then one of the things that we need to think about in the variables of this behavior is the time. So if for a while he got standard discipline, then for a while he got chats, then for a while he got these things, or even if they've sort of bounced around, then there has also been an opportunity for him to learn that, like, oh, well, if I just deal with this, then I still get to make this behavior work. And when you're running behavior intervention, the whole idea is to like ruin it for the kid. Like, quite frankly, is to make it so that behavior no longer works. So it could be possible that some of the caregivers are very responsive. I always think of a story from one of my coworkers who this kiddo who was quite young was using a lot of foul language, and it really bothered grandma. It really bothered grandma, and grandma would, even if she didn't respond, even if she didn't engage him, she would get visibly upset, right? And that this coworker of mine was sitting in the room, and the kid was yelling all sorts of terrible words, and the kid dropped the C word, which we all know what the C word is. And I remember my coworker said, she turned to grandma and she said, "Don't move," because we needed there to be a lack of response. That reward system needed to be disrupted. And so that's really what we're talking about, is how can we make this a not so functional behavior for him? And I appreciate all the things that you've done. It makes a lot of sense. I think it's also okay to have a conversation about how you don't like it. I don't like it. And when you do that, I'm not going to be able to do these things. I don't want to play with you because I don't like it when you use the language. Those are real natural consequences. If you have a friend or partner and you call them names and you make rude comments, they don't want to go to dinner with you. They don't want to hang out. And so some of those pieces are really about starting to understand what that looks like as well.
These are very interesting questions.
Oh, good.
We have just a few more minutes. If anybody has another question to ask, go ahead and pop it in the chat or the Q&A.
He is best. I see that you have put in an addition. He is best with me. It's intervention time. Yeah. It's we got to get rid of the gray area. We got to make it black and white. And just like any intervention, when you see, as parents, we all know with some behavior that gets out of hand, we're like, okay, I got to rein that in, right? And so we get really clear. We get really clear, black and white. Every time this happens, this will follow. And because this kid has multiple care settings and multiple caregivers, he's not getting that consistency, is my guess. So it's time to get everybody on the same page and make it realistic. If we're having a conversation and somebody's like, I don't think I can do that. Okay, well then what are we going to do? What does that look like if we're going to have it cross every single setting that he's in? Please suggest a parenting book for this situation. Ooh, great question. I might have to come back to that. Let me see. See 7. Let me think about that. Let me think about that and let me look into that a little bit. And if I don't, I can email you. Okay, great. I will. I will come back to that for sure. Thank you.
Looks like we did have another one come in.
Great.
3-year-old refuses to sleep in his bed. He might start there, but comes back to our bed.
This is when you're going to buy him a car. You start messing with parents' sleep. It's really hard. And we're more likely to create gray areas because we want to go to bed. And we also, sorry, I'm writing down this email. We also create a problem by solving a problem. This is like, I swear, this is the paradigm of parenting, right? Because he probably came into your bed for a particular reason. And we let him in the bed and it was helpful for a while. And now we can't get him to leave. I remember I sat on the floor and my daughter was 1.5 because she was upset. She was really anxious. She had had kind of a spook. She had had a little bit of a trauma and she was very anxious to be alone. Okay, so I sat on the floor because laying in the bed so I sat on the floor and I sat on the floor for 1.5 years, right through my entire second pregnancy, because I created a problem by solving a problem. So I'm wondering about the kiddo's room. I'm wondering around ownership of the room. I'm wondering if you guys can set up a period of time in which the expectations are low for your week, or you might be able to take a nap during the day and have a solid intervention. I would make sure that the needs are met. I would not be doing something like making it so they couldn't get out of their room, but it might be that we have to put them back in their room for a period of time. You can get really clear on this and really rigid and walk them back to their room 17, 18, 22 times, 45 times in a night, like the, what was the nanny 911 or whatever that is. Have you seen those where she like puts them in timeout like 80 times? Anyway, you can do that. You can also do more of a transition period. So if they come to your room, then they don't stay in your room, but maybe you stay in theirs. Okay. So at least we've got them into their bed and we get them used to that. And then I can start to move out of your bedroom and back into mine. Or we can get really clear and nope, this is how it's going to be. If you're going to, any kind of intervention you're going to run, I would suggest that you talk about it. These are what I call like the cereal conversations. We talk about it a little bit when everything's calm, when we're having cereal on a Saturday morning, just say, just so you know, it's going to be a little bit different at that time. And tell them how it's going to be different. Or when they come into your room at night and tell them how it's going to be different. And then when it is different, explain what it is that you're doing. So remember, this is what we talked about. We're going to go back to your room now. And we've got your toy and we've got your nightlight and we're going to make sure that you're comfy in there. And if you don't want to have a giant battle at the door, then you might sit down and you might sit there for a little while in the night, or you might decide to have them coming back and forth. We have, there's a number of different ways to kind of approach that, but I would suggest that an intervention has, again, really clear margins. Talk if there's a partner involved, if there's 2 of you, I think you said that then decide what the 2 of you can do together. Maybe you guys can take shifts. Maybe you guys can take different nights, depending on what works for you. And just plan. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a little bit of a struggle for a little while. I don't imagine very long, especially if you can get really clear on it. And I don't mean clear, but just like making them, locking them in their room. I just mean consistent in that it doesn't work, because the last thing you want to do is have the battle with them for an hour and then say, okay, fine, you can come back in. Because now, again, we've introduced the variable of time. So if I just keep this up for an hour, if I just keep doing it, eventually I'll be able to go back to their bed. So let's not introduce that variable as much as possible. A lot of what we're talking about is shaping. And shaping is the idea of, like, for a really simple example, if you think about training your dog to sit. And first we ask them to sit and they roll over and they don't do anything, or they just stare at you. And we kind of help them sit and we assist them, or they roll over and we still give them a treat because it's some approximation of what we're looking for, right? It's close. And then pretty soon we only respond positively to the particular behavior that we're looking for. And then the cruel reality is that then we take the treat away. And that's just what happens as you become an adult. Nobody gives you an M&M when you go to the bathroom anymore. But what we're doing is just that. So we're taking an approximation of what we want and we're beginning to shape it slowly until we get it to where it wants to be. You guys do this all the time. When first they go, oh, blah, 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 and you go, oh, you want some water? Okay. And we give them water. And then over a period of time, we're like, say water. Oh, water. Okay, now you can have the water. So that's shaping. So we're talking about that, but we can use it in a different context even when we're doing behavior intervention on specific things.
We did have a question about sensory resources, and I wasn't sure whether they wanted the sensory assessment information or
Absolutely.
yeah. So
So
I go ahead.
Are you comfortable if I put I'm going to put my email in the chat?
Sure.
I can provide a sensory screening if you want me to. It takes like 10 minutes, 15 minutes to fill out, and then I can score it. I am not an OT. I'm not an occupational therapist. I'll make that very clear. And it's not a diagnostics tool. It's a screening tool. So it gives an idea about what they're doing with the sensory information that they're getting. Are they more visually oriented, auditorily oriented, those sorts of things, and that can give you an idea about what to do. Also, please feel free to contact me because there are a number of providers of occupational therapists that work specifically with younger children. And getting an evaluation from a sensory provider might be more helpful than simple screening. Because they might even tell you, even if there's not a specific diagnosis, there might be, and this is something that you can do at early intervention too. And that early intervention is lovely, even if your child doesn't qualify for specific services. The early intervention assessment, the last page is recommendations. So that's gold because they can say, oh, they're a little sensitive to this. This is what you can pay attention to, or this is what you can do at home. And I have spoken to the folks at early intervention in both Arapahoe and Douglas counties in the past, and they said, yes, please send them, even if they don't think they're going to qualify for services. They want
Yes.
to, yeah.
And I was just going to say that that's the information that we have in all our libraries, and we have had OTs and speech therapists from early intervention come to some of our workshops, so
Yeah.
we can reach for them as well.
I just love that. I love the OT piece. I think it's really important. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, so yes, if you want to put your
Okay, I will do
email
that
in
now.
the chat, that would be great. And thank you. You're welcome. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. Thank you so much to Jen for her great information and advice. It was
Let's see.
really amazing stuff.
I think I just sent it to the panelists. Hold on, I'm going to send it again.
I got it set for you, Jen.
You got it?
Great.
There we
Thank
go. Yeah.
So we'll see Jen at our Family Place workshop soon. And the next Parenting Strategies program will be Tuesday, March 10 at 5:30, a little bit earlier. Our speaker will be Lucy Sofer, who will talk about Vroom, the early learning app, find out about early brain development and how parents can use the free Vroom app and other materials to boost their child's brain development. I hope to see you there. And thanks again, Jen.
Thank you,
Good
guys.
night,
Thank you, everyone. And thank you for your great questions. Have a good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Have a good one.